Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to be making a EVA foam skull mask that I'm going to be using for Ghost Rider. However, I feel like you could probably use this pattern for a lot of other things. Skeletor, Taskmaster, etc. This definitely wasn't the easiest build I've ever done. It was hard to pattern, and I had to really think out how to plan pre-heat shaping the pieces and then gluing them together. And then a ton of heat shaping after that to actually get the skull back into it. But without me blabbering on anymore, let's just go ahead and jump right into the video. Oh boy, what did I get myself into? So, before I start gluing any of these pieces that I cut out together, several things. You only need one center jaw piece, but you do need two of everything else. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is prep these to be glued by gluing the V-cuts together. Will be step one. Step two is going to be some heat forming. But first I need to contact cement all these V-cuts together. And this next part could be considered optional, I suppose, but there's a line here on the jaw to cut. That is so that I can glue it offset. In other words, when I get done with it, it's going to be glued like that. It's not going to be even. It's going to be going in on both sides of the jaw. You can cut this and offset it. You can heat it and use that as a guide where to push it in and shape it. But I'm going to actually do a bit of both. I'm going to cut it. As you see here, I've already cut it. I'm going to glue it offset, and then later I'm going to heat it. And first, I'm going to glue these and the V-cuts on my pieces. Okay, so if you haven't used contact cement before, what you do is I pull out the brush, try to get rid of all the excess, and then I just put an even amount onto each surface that you're going to glue together, i.e. I put some on either side of the V-cut, for example. Then you let it rest for about 15 minutes, and then you just press it together, and it should stick. Now, I feel like for the most part, people that do cosplay or anything really out of EVA foam tend to use barge contact cement. I happen to really like that stuff for leather. I don't have as good a luck with foam. I do if I'm very careful to scrape off any excess on either surface, but I usually just stick with the dab. It is a little bit lower in cost, but as far as I'm concerned, if you put enough on each surface evenly, allow it the proper time, I don't have any issues or problems with it. And just like that, all of them will stick together. Now for the jaw, I actually did not use contact cement. I cheated. I just held it offset how I wanted it, and then I took some super glue and used super glue to do the jaw offset. Okay, and as you see with the V-cuts, it helps to add some curve that we'll smooth out later with the heat gun. Now before I start gluing together the face, which will essentially be next, first I have to put some bends. You'll notice on the pattern there's some lines, solid lines drawn that are a little thicker, and they say fold and bend. That is where I'm going to heat this with a heat gun and curve it. I have to do this anywhere that it says so, face, pieces, and on the number 3 pieces as well, the 2 and the 1s. Okay, so as far as the heating and bending goes, I have a dual setting heat gun. I put it on the high setting. I wait about 10 seconds till I know it's hot, and then I heat up the area that I want to shape. And to get this shape here into this, what I did was pushed my fingers inward and pulled like that, which gave it this fold that has a slight curve in it, and it also comes up a bit. And like I said, I did that similar process on all these pieces. And what this is going to be basically is going to be the eye socket. So it's going to be a lot harder, I feel like, to try to glue this together and then heat shape this the rest of the way later. At least this way I kind of have a start, if you know what I mean. And the first sets of things I'm going to glue together is the face pieces, A, B, and C. I'm going to glue them to one another. And I also went and heated the nostril area a little bit and did a similar process to what I did on the bends, just because I figured, once again, that'll help give me some decent initial shape but I'm going to glue together A, B, and C on each side, but I'm not going to join them together in the middle yet. Okay, I've glued together the pieces of the face, and whenever I do this, I got my little pattern pieces here. First things I glued together were I glued part A to part B, which is the two top pieces here, okay? And once those are glued together, I put contact cement along the edges to put A and B to C. Now, when you glue this, you're going to want to start at this end, line up your registration marks, and as I was looking at it, it didn't quite look right. I had to go back through and double check my own pattern because I did not put the one on this side correctly. And it was a good thing I double checked that. Had I not double checked that, it would have glued off. But whenever you put A and B, start at the back here as you're attaching it to C. Okay, when you get here to this other one, it looks like the registration mark isn't going to fit. In fact, it'll be a good several millimeters above this one if you bring it straight down. You have to force the foam in so that the two marks meet. What this will do is cause a divot. When you heat this, the divot will kind of pop out to one side or the other naturally. I pushed mine this way because this is right below the eye socket, and you want this part to curve in. There's some funky stuff like this here and there throughout this pattern. And like I say, it's because I put as much shape and definition into the thing that I sculpted to actually pull this pattern off of. And all this is going to help give it some good shape even before we really do any real heat shaping. Alright, so next I glued the jaw together, also using contact cement, and this side is still flat. I have not heated it, and this side I have heated, as well as the center. And the center, I heated it and pushed it this way. It kind of naturally wants to go that way due to the nature of the shape of each of these sides opposing as they glue together. They don't want to stay level. Immediately they want to start to take that jaw shape. And then this is what I was saying earlier about it not quite being necessary to cut this and offset it, because I am going to heat this in. But this also requires an extra step later where I'm going to have to use my Dremel to smooth this out. But whatever. And from there, I just kind of curved the bottom and heated this top piece here on both sides and curved it in using my heat gun. And this is pretty important. This fits quite snugly and perfectly into here after heating and shaping it. Whenever you heat foam, it shrinks. Now you'll notice, if you don't heat this piece, it is a bit too large to fit into here. It just doesn't quite want to go. You see it's overlapping on this side, is just too big. But whenever you apply heat to it, the foam does shrink slightly, which is why this is slightly upscaled. So if you skip using the heat gun and heating and shaping this stuff now, you're going to have some issues with things like this fitting. Once I got my basic superficial shapes and things like this, I went and heated from the back side a little bit along the gums. Carefully though, I didn't get it too hot. Like I say, it shrinks and it will also melt, especially on these thinner areas like these points. And just kind of curved those in slightly all the way around. You can see here on the side, and slightly in here on the front and on the other side as well. So, and then also heated on the back side a bit and held this in place so it has more of a jaw shape. And not much surprise here. Another thing I'm using for reference is an actual plastic skull. I'm not in the slightest sure if this is like 100% anatomically correct, but it helps to give me some ideas where I want to, sand some things. And you'll notice, for example, that line here corresponds with the offset line here, and that's why I did a lot of the things I did the way I did. Is because I have a actual model here. I got this at Spirit, and since it is around that time of the year, you can pretty much easily find them. I think that was $10 last year, but I believe I got it on the 50% off sale. I wasn't really sure why I bought it at the time, but apparently it was for this. Okay, so I've taken the one side and I've glued the number 1 and number 2 together, and for this I basically start at the back of it and I line up my first registration mark, and get that as even as possible. And then I just try to get this as flush as I can while lining up my marks. And once again, I did go through and double check both patterns before doing this. After doing that one wrong, now I'm paranoid. And it's not the first time that I've made a mistake like that, but you know, it's an excellent reminder to always double check your work. It's one thing to go fast and efficient, but it's another thing to rush it. And with as much as I had been working, I'm not going to lie, I had been rushing it a little bit. And to point out another kind of weird area here, whenever you get to this last registration mark, if you, like me, started from the back, you're going to notice that this piece drops down about 3-4 millimeters. Same as the other one, you're going to have to force this up in so that these two lines, like the bottom of this, lines up. It may seem awkward and weird, but as you can notice, it's starting to push in a rather sinister brow, like to a skull right here, outside of the ocular cavity. Same thing on both sides. You get that nice oomph right there. So once again, this is why I always put in my Etsy listings to watch the video prior to making this and watch it while you make it. I get complaints from people, well, this didn't fit perfectly together when I put it together. Did you watch the video? Well, no. That's probably why. There's certain things that, like this, that you wouldn't notice if you didn't watch this video and you just bought patterns, you made foam stuff before, and you just try to do this. Maybe you'd figure it out, and maybe you wouldn't. Okay, and once again, glued the number 3 to the 1 and 2. And now that that's done, I'm going to put contact cement and attach the face on each side. Okay, I got the face on, and same as before, you'll notice a little overlap on this end. You've just got to smush it in there, which will help to push out that cheekbone shape right there. And same thing on the eye. The bottom piece seems a bit longer than the top, but you start at the edge and sandwich it in, and it will push this bend in here a little bit that you can then heat in later for the nose, and just follow it around to finish off your eye opening. Next, I'm going to put contact cement on each of these and glue the two halves together. And this is what it looks like with both sides glued together. Now, I'm going to need to do a lot of further heat shaping. You can see this is a bit too pointy here. It needs to be more round. Nose needs to come out more. This needs to be heated and pulled in more. Need to emphasize the eye sockets and push in some of this. But before I get to any of the subtle facial shaping and things like that, what I really need to do is round out any of these points that are a little pointy, like you notice there and here. And also on the V-cuts, you'll get little bumps right here. Best way to do that is to use something round and at least mostly solid. Definitely not something that is flammable like styrofoam. Make sure it is something solid. And I will heat the areas and then press on it once I heat it up with my heat gun to round out any areas that are a little bumpy or lumpy, or just to make it look more like a rounded off skull so it doesn't have that point going on. Okay, I got the rounding out done on the back here, and then I immediately moved on to the face. And I started with the eyes and heating up a couple inches at a time, even overlapping the seams. I first heated from the inside and stuck this finger on the inside and then pushed on the outside with these fingers to help bring the brows out more. It's really important to make it look like a skull, I feel. And I did that gradually all the way around both sides. And once I did both sides, after rounding this and doing both eyes, I heated this area here and subtly pushed it in. Take it off here, get a better look at it. See, it goes in about 1/4 inch or so at least at the deepest of its depth on either side of the eye before coming back out and being round. And I did this on both sides as evenly as I could and through here. Next, I pulled out this area where these 3 seams all meet, and I heated it and pulled it out to make cheekbones essentially on it, and then really heated and pushed in the divots here before finally going over the nose, first from the inside and then from the outside, and doing similar to the eyes, where I'm pinching this like this from the outside as I'm pushing on the back with my other finger to give it a nice shape of a nose coming out. And lastly, heated and rounded off the jaw. This is pretty much essential to make, you know, the assembled blobby pattern look good. Like I said, you can put your own touch to it. I thought about actually superheating this area right through here and trying to pinch and put a V into it, but I decided against that. I'm not going to do that actually. I'm just going to leave it round. That way I have enough room if I want to put lights in it, I can. Now that that's done, the jaw is just kind of there. So I'm going to finish heating and shaping this so that it will match up nicely visually, not just to glue it, but so that it matches up. Okay, I've glued on my jaw. However, I've only glued on the front edge here and the top. The back I'm actually not going to have indented like this here. The back is actually going to overlap a bit onto this piece here. Alright, so I glued my jaw on with the back overlapping on both sides, and now that that was done, the only area I really hadn't heated much was right in here on the number 3 piece. So I heated around the jaw itself and used my thumb to press it in just to give it a bit more depth and definition when you're looking at it from the side here or over on this side as well. When you're looking down it gives it more of a skeletal shape. And now I'm going to take some scrap EVA foam. This is 2mm, just cheap craft foam. And I'm going to glue it in the back of this jaw because the jaw is a bit flimsy. You could in theory just cut more pattern pieces of the same shape and cut them a little bit smaller and glue them in, but I'm just going to eyeball it, cut it out, glue it in. Help to stabilize this a bit before I start making and gluing in teeth. Okay, so here I have my teeth pieces, and I've already heated and curved these. And these are rather small, and the heat gun, when you try to heat them, will blow them all over the place. So what I usually do is take a needle and hold them in place, let my heat gun warm up for a second, and then heat it. And then as quickly as possible, pull it off, remove the needle, don't stab yourself, and then just squeeze and pull it into shape however you want. I just put a slight curve into it that way and that way, and I'm going to start gluing these in using super glue. Okay, now I have all of my top teeth in, and the reason why I did the top teeth first is I really wanted to make sure that they were going to overlap over the bottom. So if I needed to heat and bend this in any, I could. So it wouldn't look weird or goofy if the bottom teeth were somehow coming up over the top. So yeah, top first, and then the bottom. And you'll notice in the patterns, I basically go from the center tooth on the top and the bottom over, if that makes sense. So for the other side, you just flip them over and go that way. Although I do cut them all slightly different, and as you'll notice, I didn't put them in totally straight. They're a bit gnarly, but that was pretty much intentional. So yeah, pretty stoked on this so far. Okay, now that I have all of my teeth in, I'm going to move on and put on my nose piece, which here is 2 of them glued together. The top part of it you need to cut at an angle so that they will match up and it will form this V shape. However, this is going to be glued with the flat side conforming to the back and the curved side. You'll notice there is a slight curve in both pieces to the front. And you're going to line that up with the shape that you put around your nose. Okay, I've glued on my nose piece, and this stuff that you see around it here is super glue that I then sprinkled a little bit of baking soda in, did a couple layers just to even it out and make sure it's nice and sturdy for whenever I sand it with my Dremel. Okay, so next you'll notice these dimples in here. How I got this in without actually damaging the rest of my heat forming was I cut a hole out of a piece of EVA foam and then heat a small area and then just press my fingers into it to get that appearance, which I'm going to sand those in a little bit deeper whenever I do the dremeling, but it gives me an idea of where to put the dremel and where to sand. Okay, so for most projects, whenever I dremel something, I usually spend anywhere from 15 minutes to a half hour. Part of that gets chopped down and put into a time lapse. Same will happen here, but this took over an hour. But I really wanted to make sure that everything was as rounded out as possible and looking as nice as possible. I also even dremeled in the jawbone area and up top where the teeth fit into the top part of the jaw. I also rounded out the insides, but it spent a lot of time because a lot of these seams are in such awkward places. It was really, really hard to get into to actually smooth that out and remove some of the glue that had gobbed over as well. Next, I have some 150 grit sandpaper that I've already used on some plastic stuff sanding, so it's definitely not 150 grit anymore. And then I have a 200 grit block that I've really worn down to the point it feels closer to 300. I have a 300 block that basically goes 600. Why am I explaining this? Because if you're curious as to what I do, it's essentially 150, 300, 600. If that makes sense. These just aren't what they originally were anymore after sanding so much. But I start off with this to help just kind of smooth and rough everything up in between my Dremel work and try to get as much of the lines out, and then just work down to the finest grit. Alright, I have finished all of my sanding, and once I was done, I got my heat gun on high. I let it get pretty hot and then just quickly go over a section and then smooth it out with my fingertips as much as possible, and that really helped remove a lot of the sand lines and stuff that I just couldn't quite sand out. But yeah, now I'm going to start cutting a little bit of detail into the teeth. Okay, so to finish off the teeth here, I used my xacto knife to just put some lines randomly in them, and then I took some scissors, and like you'll notice on this tooth right here, put a little nick in it, and this one just randomly did some stuff, chipped some, etc., etc., just so they look, you know, less like foam, and hopefully we'll pull off the facade of teeth. Okay, now I'm going to move on to covering some of these seams. Now, being that I'm planning on putting flames up here, whether those are something that's translucent and lights up, or whether it's something stagnant that I just paint, I'm not going to so much worry about this area. However, if you're using this for something where the whole thing is going to be showing, you may want to cover these up. Not super noticeable generally once it's painted and everything, but when the light hits it, you can see that there's a seam there. And how I'm going to cover this is with some DAP Clear all-purpose acrylic latex caulk plus silicone. This is not the fast dry. The fast dry stuff you can actually sand, but I think it's a little harder to work with. This stuff's easier to work with, I think, but it's kind of impossible to sand. It dries very similar to, well, silicone or latex, and those things don't really like being sanded. And what I do is I take the tube, put it in my caulking gun, I put it all in a container, and even though this container has a lid, I still put some saran wrap on it press it down tight every time I'm done with it to keep it as fresh as possible. And what I do is I take my finger, get a little dab on the end of my finger, and then you'll notice right here, I have this. I will then just use this stuff to cover it. And as the label says, this is an acrylic, so it is water-based. As it dries, the water will evaporate, and a lot of times I will have to go over and do a couple more coats to totally get rid of the seam itself. Once is usually just not good enough. After I have spread this on and covered it, I will then take my finger and I get off as much of the excess silicone as possible, and just some tap water. And then I use the tap water to smooth this out. Kind of the same you would if you've ever done like pottery in high school or grade school even for an art project. Or maybe you do it professionally and you're like, man, this guy sucks. I don't know. But yeah, you get the idea. Very similar to that. I'm going to do that on all these seams where I'm not going to have flames. I'm not going to do it on the jaw or this because obviously this is meant to be here. But like all these seams around the eyes. In other words, I got a lot of work to do. Even this seam here I'm not super worried about. But mainly just these around the eyes. Particularly on the face. That's where anybody's going to be looking. And if I'm going to put the amount of time to do this kind of Dremel work and cutting all the little details into the teeth, etc., I might as well cover the seams too as best. Alright, now that all my silicone has dried, I've already gone through and sealed this, and I sealed it using Mod Podge and a brush. However, you don't have to use that. You could use Plastidip, or I'm pretty sure Flex Seal also manufactures and sells a product very similar to Plastidip. You could also use an aerosol Mod Podge. I just end up using this a lot because for the cost of this is similar to the cost of a can of Plastidip. And with a can of Plastidip I can do 1.5, maybe 2 projects if it's big, usually just 1 can. But aside from the cost difference, the other thing is, whenever I primer this, if there's any spots that I think I need to re-silicone, then I will re-silicone it and then reseal it and then repaint it. Doing that with Plastidip causes a lot of layers of buildup, and that's fine if you want that. But what it ends up also doing is taking out some of the detail. Eventually starts to get lost to an extent under all those layers. So that's the other reason that I personally avoid it. And now that it is sealed and it is dried, I will be airbrushing it with black next. And I did apply 2 coats to the whole piece, but 3 to the main facial area, just to help once again obscure and cover all of those seams that I just filled. And if you're curious as to exactly how I apply this, I generally tend to start from a point A and go to a point B, and that depends on the flow of the mask. For example, here I started with the eyes and went straight to the back, all the way around the piece, and then for the jaw I just went straight down. And for the teeth, straight up on the bottom and straight down on the top, and that's pretty much it. Okay, I've allowed about 24 hours for my primer to dry. And I took some white airbrush paint and a couple drops of brown and a couple drops of yellow and mixed that together until I got a color that I liked. And now I'm going to go ahead and airbrush this up. Okay, so I got all the white sprayed on, and you'll probably notice I put it a little thicker here, where it's more solid white, and a little thinner here, just to give it a bit more depth with color, to bring out some of the stuff that I had molded into the foam. And now I'm going to take some black and do some lowlights. Okay, and lastly, I took some yellow and did some light overspray here on the teeth. Just because, you know, I guess Ghost Riders just gotta have plaque, but I also wanted them to stand out a bit from the rest of it. Okay, so I ended up putting some LEDs in this, and they were LEDs from a dollar store, Dollar Tree to be exact. They're orange lights for Halloween. They take 2 AA batteries, and of course they're only on the inside. Probably not going to go with flames in this video. If I do, I will include it in a future video. If I do, it'll probably put it in with the final cosplay reveal video, but what I did put inside was lights for the eyes and just to make the mask glow from the inside out. Like there's some wound up around the nose, the teeth, and then around the bottom so that there's a orange light coming out. Now as far as the eyes go, shut these off, there is a piece of EVA foam that I super glued to the backside. And as far as putting the lights in, luckily these wire LED lights, you can just bend the wires into whatever shapes you want, and I just use scrap pieces of 2mm EVA foam and some super glue to hold everything in place. And then just ran them around the bottom and secured them in, and then, yeah, this is just going to have to be concealed in my leather motorcycle jacket. So, yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. The only thing that's left is for me to try this on with the jacket and some chains and see how it looks so far. So I went to Spirit Halloween and actually couldn't find a morph mask, so what I ended up doing was going to the Dollar Tree, or no, Dollar General, and getting a cheap plastic mask that had one of these thin black hoods on it, and I tore the hood off, and I just crudely tie it over my face, just like Daredevil in the Netflix series, more or less, and that helps to obscure my eyes and my nose. Now, if I don't put this on, then you can clearly see my eyes and nose and face and stuff behind the mask itself. So, morph mask is kind of necessary if you don't want somebody seeing your eyes or nose or facial features behind the holes here. You could also just cover them with something, but I don't really want to do that. And real quick before I end the video, I have some plastic chains that I got at a dollar store, and these were actually pretty cool, and the main reason why I got them was they have spots in the links right here where you can pop them apart. So I ended up making this about 12 to 14 feet long. I'm not 100% sure, I haven't measured it. Have a vintage motorcycle jacket. I got this years ago whenever my buddy Vince gave it to me. This was made in 1981, so this is 38 years old. And I've held on to this for 10 years, hoping at some point, well, back then I wasn't so much thinking 10 years ago about cosplay, but about just a Halloween costume. And for the last 5-6 years, I've been thinking about this for Ghost Rider, so I'm pretty excited to be able to use this. And then, of course, morph mask and the mask. And I also have a neck piece from an older video I'm going to put into this just to cover my neck. And the lights that were kind of coming out of the jacket, right where the zipper stopped, was just some orange lights that I duct taped together that run on AA batteries. And lastly, but very important, is I took just enough of this 1-inch polypro strapping. It is made out of a synthetic material, but I cut just enough of it and glued it inside the mask and glued it to the back side of the battery box here. But first, I had roughed it up with some sandpaper and glued it on with some super glue and put some baking soda around it just to help that set in, make sure it's not going to come off. It serves two purposes. One, you'll probably notice in the video of me wearing the jacket and everything in the light and the dark, you can see the wire. This is to help cover it, and ideally this whole entire piece would be underneath the neck piece. However, I didn't have my fiance or kids here, and this is my only time off to actually film this, so I kind of had to do it now. But the other main purpose is that if it falls, this strap is shorter than the actual wire itself. So if this falls, the strap will go tight and catch it instead of the wire. That way you don't inadvertently tear your wiring, so you have to resolder it or whatever. Okay, so that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you all enjoyed this and it inspired you to go and make your own projects. I will post a video, like I say, in the future whenever I do decide to put the flames on. I am getting close to 4,000 subscribers, and as always when I hit that, I will do another giveaway. And this has been on my mind for about 4 years, maybe 5 at this point, how I could go about making this. And I finally decided I was ready to attempt it. But I've always wondered how you could pull off a decent Ghost Rider costume when I was a small child. I was at Hartville Flea Market in Ohio when I was a small child. My parents would take me there, and I found a bag full of comics, and a bunch of them were vintage 70s Ghost Rider comics. This was in the late 80s or early 90s, and that was my first exposure to Ghost Rider, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And then whenever I had gone to the comic store a little later, it was one of the first times I'd ever been to any comic store, even knew that they existed. I went and picked up Ghost Rider, and it was Dan Ketch, which is why I largely based this cosplay off of the Dan Ketch Ghost Rider. Also, if you don't know, here's a piece of news if you've watched this far. Marvel will be launching Ghost Rider #1, a sort of revamp to the series, but they are including a lot of the old continuity, in particular building upon the relationship between Johnny Blaze as he rules down there, and Dan Ketch as he is the Ghost Rider up here. And Dan Ketch, of course, is very reluctant, I would imagine, to be assuming this mantle. So I can't wait to see that. I'm pretty excited for that. That should be out October, the beginning of October 2019. So not too long from now, that will be out. I'm really excited for that comic. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And as always, have a great day.